Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could teach the gullible to never be so comfortable with lies they eat like comfort food, to disregard the bogus claims and pseudoscientific claims? Can you imagine just how much indeed the world would change? No more political predators playing on the populace with ilkas and plots to shift and kill metropolis. No more villains with the title in the Bible holding phony temper Bibles like the stuff they teach is vital. Imagine it was no one left to prove a claim you make, and folks really feel ashamed expressing content that was fake. It's not to say we never make mistakes, it's just to say we go out of our way to show the evidence it takes.
Remain skeptical while you travel the road, the reason stay strapped with logic and facts. That's what it is, yo. Keep reality intact to help the truth grow. Question every claim, especially the ones you believe in. Remain skeptical while you travel the road, the reason.
Hey everyone, welcome to Road to Reason, a skeptic's guide to the 21st century. I'm Rob Penczak. I'm a physician turned writer and the director of Atheist Alliance of America. Today I'm joined by Sarah Levin, who may look familiar to you. She's hosted a few shows in the past. She's now the senior legislative representative for Secular Coalition for America. Thank you so much for coming back.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Our guest today in about 10 to 15 minutes is going to be Larry Decker, who's the executive director for Secular Coalition. First we're going to run through some news and announcements. First bit of news we're going to hit is when religious freedom leaves children dead. So this is a story about Jessica Crank, who was a young woman that had a swollen shoulder. She went to a nurse practitioner who saw evidence of the bone being destroyed, referred her to an emergency room, but the mother never followed up on that. They later saw a chiropractor, not the bastion of medical advice as we've spoken about before, and even the chiropractor tried to get them to go to a hospital. The mother, again, did not do this. Instead, she chose to turn to Jesus Christ, her Lord and Savior. Crank, the mother, was eventually found guilty of misdemeanor child neglect. Her daughter died. This went all the way to the Supreme Court, where they were trying to appeal this. The mother tried to say that it was her right under the Tennessee Code, where it said under state law it was not considered abuse or neglect for parents to seek treatment by spiritual means through prayer alone. The only reason this case was upheld was that the mother was not her own religious institution. Had she been an actual church, then she probably would have prevailed. So, this raises the issue of actual harm that comes from these kind of religious exemptions. So what do you think? How is it that the church is not culpable in some way for doing this, and what do we need to do legally to get protection for children?
Well, unfortunately, these exemptions for medical abuse and neglect are actually very prevalent in many of the states in the United States, and the reason is because of the lobbying by Christian Scientists at the federal level. A lot of states rely on federal funding and block grants for their child welfare programs, and so due to the lobbying of Christian Scientists at the federal level years back, they basically got the government to use that as leverage for states to have to basically have this kind of exemption in place to get the funding. And so this has been an issue in a number of states, especially Idaho, where there are entire cemeteries of dead children due to a large following of Christian Scientists there who refuse to take their kids to the doctor. And really this is unfortunately a state-by-state issue where we're going to need people to speak up and say, we need to repeal this at the state level because it's unacceptable. But it's happening.
Yeah, and this was, I wasn't aware of that until looking at this article, that this was really pushed from the federal level, telling states you need to work in these exclusions. So again, this isn't something that just accidentally happened on the scene, and it's a really good example of how religion meddling in politics leads to bad policy that leads to people dying or being disenfranchised in numerous ways.
Right, and the interesting thing is this case that came up this week took place in Tennessee. The same session where they got rid of Tennessee's religious exemptions for medical abuse and neglect, they also passed legislation that would allow religious therapists to deny care to a child if they happen to have a religious objection. So say it's an LGBT child in middle school who is being bullied, and they go to the therapist, and therapist happens to feel that being LGBT is an abomination, they can refuse care from a child who is seeking their help. Say it's a Muslim child or an atheist child, they can just refuse that care. And even the Therapist Association at the state level opposed it. And so it's very interesting that the Tennessee legislators are kind of picking and choosing which kind of religious beliefs they want to privilege. So okay, they disagree with the kind of Christian Scientist, faith healing, in response to this case, but in the same session, they're totally willing to allow therapists who are caring for children who may be the only source of help that they have in their environment to turn them away from any religiously based reason.
Right, and it shows kind of how broken our political system is and how hypocritical that they finally got pressured into doing it because somebody died, it's out in the public, so we'd better act. but our actual motivation is still to continue the same practice that will undoubtedly lead to the same problem in just a slightly different permutation, where some kid's going to commit suicide because they didn't have the help or were turned away.
Right, and it's really unfortunate that it takes these cases for people to pay attention, but the truth is that these exemptions are very, very widespread. That's why the Secular Coalition launched the Put Kids First campaign last year, which actually encompasses a number of issues regarding child welfare, one being religious and philosophical exemptions for vaccines, the other being religious exemptions like Idaho and in Tennessee for medical neglect and abuse, and the third being religious exemptions for regulation of child daycare centers.
Yeah, and I know, and I was trying to remember which book. There's either a book by Rob Boston or David Niosi where they go through all these examples of people, like kids dying because of these religious exemptions, and one of the examples is for daycares, they're not required to have the same kind of staffing or supervision, so kids will end up dying in the van because they get left there and there wasn't adequate supervision, and then nothing happens. So it has that real consequence that people often think atheists are just being out of place and brash to even bother bringing this up, until they see the reality, and numbers don't tell the stories as well. You actually need people to die and a child's face to be on the television, and then people finally get it. Maybe we can shift to talk a little bit about, recently the Donald Trump video came out, and it probably wasn't a surprise to many people. People have a very good understanding of what he is, but now for some reason this is all the rage, and maybe this is what's going to break the camel's back. What were the other issues going on that American voters, that secular voters might have been aware of even before this came out, that are a little bit more substantive, that could have given us pause before electing him?
Right. Well, the recent outrages about his comments toward women, and it's no surprise. I mean, him and his running mate, Governor Pence, have positions that are incompatible with religious freedom when it comes to reproductive rights and women's rights. Don't forget, Governor Pence signed a law that would force women who have abortions to have a funeral for the fetus. It was ruled unconstitutional, but there's no doubt that their views, when Trump was asked a few months ago about whether women should be punished for having abortions, he said yes. And so it comes to no surprise that he holds these misogynistic views of women. And then when it comes to secular voters, issues like climate change, he thinks climate change is a hoax, promoted by the Chinese. He denied at the last debate that he said that, but there's a recording. We know that he has said that. And with vaccines, in the early presidential debates, he refused to acknowledge that vaccines work, and that the schedule that is recommended by the CDC is what we should follow. And so he's peddling all these kind of anti-science, anti-evidence sort of views. And so this really comes to no surprise. His position, he got an F on our presidential voter guide, so no surprises this week.
Yeah, so just to be clear, nobody, well, none of us would ever defend him for his abhorrent views toward women and toward all sorts of people. But there's all these meaty things that if you're paying attention with critical thinking, this is number 50 of the reasons that you might want to exclude this person from running our country and affecting social policy that's going to affect 300 million plus people. Right. So we're going to move on. Do you want to let's do some announcements of what's coming up, or when people can kind of see you and Larry Decker?
Sure. So you'll meet Larry Decker in a few minutes, but you can also see us locally on Monday, October 24th. We'll be speaking at the Washington Area Secular Humanists, and then on Sunday, October 30th, Larry will be speaking at the Northern Virginia Ethical Society, which is a branch of one of our voting member organizations, the American Ethical Union. So definitely stop by and come see us. You can find out more on their organization's websites or on secular.org.
Okay, great. Yeah, and if you guys send us links, we're happy to put that on the Facebook page so it's easy for people watching the show to get information. One other thing I guess I'll mention is that Atheist Alliance of America is going to be having its annual conference next Labor Day, so get a head start right now. We're going to have a lot of great speakers. If you want to come see Arn Ra, I think hopefully Tombstone the Dead Man is going to come down, Peter Boghossian, Anthony Magnabosco, if you want to learn more about street epistemology. I'll be there, Mark Gura, John Loftus will probably be there again, Phil Torres. We're hoping to get Larry Decker to come down, maybe talk about the importance of lobbying. But this is going to be a phenomenal event, so if you're interested in a lot of the issues that we hit, please just think about keeping your Labor Day open. We'll post more information as that comes available. We're going to do, for Secular Person of the Week, we're going to actually nominate two. So this is a documentary here by Roger Weisberg and John Fugelsang. So Roger Weisberg has really devoted his career to representing the disenfranchised people, making documentaries about poverty, healthcare, the justice system, and a lot of things that affect all these people that don't have a voice. So this one sort of looks about the state of the American dream with our rampant inequality. John Fugelsang is a media personality on TV, on radio. He's a stand-up comedian and political satirist, and he brings a lot of empathy as he interviews 200 people about the state of their American dream and where they see things going. So again, this is a wonderful humanist work. It had its PBS broadcast debut on Friday. I hope a lot of people kind of track this down to watch, because this will help us get more educated voters going into the election. I think we are going to skip our joke of the week. It just had to do with Ray Comfort has a movie with how atheism has now been disproved, and it won Science Film of the Year in some, in his Christian circle. So kudos to Ray Comfort, I suppose. We are going to come right back in a couple of minutes with Larry Decker, Executive Director of Secular Coalition for America.
One of the goals of an atheist community is to provide support for those who find themselves without faith in light of mounting evidence against unfounded beliefs. Organizations with this goal range from skeptic groups to humanist service meetups to support groups for those who may have lost a community through their deconversion. In response to this, Recovering from Religion, an organization that seeks to support those who have left their faith, has recently launched the Hotline Project. This is not a deconversion hotline. The motive behind the project is to support a growing population of people who have left their faith and need to construct their identities around a new, beautiful reality. If you want more information, you can visit the Recovering from Religion website at recoveringfromreligion.org.
Good.
Homemade noodles. Marty, stop it. Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. It reminds me, I've been thinking maybe we should try a new form of birth control. I heard about this one. It's called the IUD, intrauterine device. Or we could try the patch on your arm. Actually, I think that one goes on your butt.
Bedsider.org has birth control information and a lot more. And it's...
What do you think, Fred? Arm or the butt?
There's a lot of tree branches and dry brush over here. We should probably put the bonfire over there.
I'm guessing Smokey liked that idea.
This is Richard Dawkins. Doing commercials is unfamiliar territory for me, but I'm inviting you to watch Road to Reason, a skeptic's guide to the 21st century, on Fairfax Public Access every Sunday. Each week, the hosts tackle wishful thinking, religion, pseudoscience, and the harm they cause, with a combination of facts, humor, and community involvement. They challenge believers to defend their faith and give you, the skeptic, a voice. With live call-ins for viewers and streaming on the World Wide Web, there's never a dull moment. Don't wait. Look at them now on Facebook and YouTube, and remember to watch Road to Reason, a skeptic's guide to the 21st century, or there'll be hell to pay.
Welcome back to Road to Reason. I'd like to give a quick shout out to the interns at the Secular Coalition for America who keep the wheels turning, Rebecca Brown and Chloe Shostak. Thank you so much for all your work.
Yes, absolutely. All right, so we are now joined by Larry Decker. He's the Executive Director for Secular Coalition for America. Thank you so much for making time for us this afternoon.
It's my pleasure. I'm glad to be here. Thank you, Rob.
So can you start by giving us just some background about the Secular Coalition, how long it's been around as an organization, how it's comprised and what goes into it, and what its primary functions are?
Yes, absolutely. So we were actually founded close to 15 years ago. And the reason that we were founded was because as secular groups were getting more prominence in the United States, our founder and current president, Herb Silverman, who many of your viewers I'm sure know, wanted to make sure that we had a way that we were talking off the same sheet of music when it came to public policy. And that we were creating an opportunity to have some real lobbying efforts go behind some of the great work of all of the member organizations of the Secular Coalition. We started with 4. There were 4 groups who got together. Today we've grown to having 19 national organizations that we represent in Washington and state legislatures across the country.
Excellent. And I want to just mention that during this show, so Sarah also, is an important player at Secular Coalition. So I'm going to ask a lot of questions to Larry, and I'm asking Sarah to jump in. She'll ask some questions too, but there's a lot of these that both of you guys can speak to. So
Absolutely.
We're going to do some personal things, just sort of about your life, so people know where you're coming from. But anyway, so that's how this is going to work. So you spent the last 2 decades working in D.C. This had an 8-year stint at the American Red Cross. You were director of government operations and also a lobbyist there. You did some time at Chamber of Commerce, Department of Treasury under Bill Clinton, and you also worked with the Global Fund, which focuses on combating HIV/AIDS, tuberculosis, malaria. So first I just want to ask, how important is it that with your life you're doing socially important things? I mean, it seems to be a big component of what you do.
Well, I think it's always been an incredibly important thing for me to make sure that I'm feeling a sense of gratification and fulfillment in the work that I do. And I think that for most Americans, they would feel the same way, that they want to really dedicate their lives to things that they feel strongly and passionately about. And that's why, last year, as we were going through the whole interview process and everything with the Secular Coalition for America, when I first saw this job opportunity, I said I really have to be engaged, because these have always been issues that have been compelling for me, it's really just been terrific.
Okay. And what skills and sort of personal connections and relationships do you think you've developed in the last 20 years that are going to serve you well at Secular Coalition, making you a good leader there?
You keep saying 20 years. I love it. I was texting with one of my best friends from college last night.
I need you to look old, so I look young. Well, it's like 40, 50 years.
We were actually commenting. She was at my sister's wedding, and her son is now 17, and he has his own car and his driver's license. And she said, can we be that old? And I said, yeah, actually we can be. Over 20 years, I think that you learn a lot of different things in D.C. And like you said, I worked on Capitol Hill. I was an appointee in the Clinton administration. I've worked in the private sector. I've worked for nonprofit organizations, mostly in government affairs capacities, in government relations capacities. And I think some of the things that you learn is, are number one, you have to listen. You have to step back and really listen to what the concerns are, not just of the constituents that you're representing, but also of perhaps those who disagree with you. And you have to really find ways to work not just on one side of the aisle, but on both sides of the aisle, and to bring people together. I think it's incredibly important. I've been doing that throughout the majority of my career, working on building coalitions, and it's something that I think we're starting to take to a next level, even at the Secular Coalition for America, where we've done a really good job, and the entire movement's done a good job of talking to our constituencies, but how do we expand that tent? How do we bring more people into it so that they can understand the position that we are coming from, and we can start to dispel many of the notions that have been created about atheists and non-theists in the country, and just many of the other distortions that we've seen from the conservative right, the Christian right in particular, on definitions of things that we hold dear, like religious freedom. I think that those are some of the things that I can bring to the organization. One of the other things I'll touch on and I'm really fortunate that we have a terrific board of directors at the Secular Coalition for America, is that now that we've been around for 15 or so years, we're looking back and we're saying, what have we done well? What can we do better? And how do we professionalize this movement? Because I think it's really imperative that we look at our management, we look at our fiscal responsibility to our donors, we look at how we're reporting back not just to donors but to our constituents, we look at how we're engaging with members of Congress, and we look at ways that, not just for the Secular Coalition, but for the movement at large, amongst our 19 member organizations, how we can professionalize this movement, show strength in numbers, show a real strong unity, and really hone in on messages that are compelling, not just for secular Americans, but for Americans who may identify with religion, but they certainly have sympathy and understanding and appreciation for the work that we're trying to do.
Yeah, I'm going to want to get back to 2 of those points. One, I want to talk about something you said about learning from the past so we make better decisions. I'm going to get back to that a little bit later. First of all, the other one I want to touch on is about growing the tent. So David Silverman, the president of American Atheists, has been criticized and really vilified for going to CPAC as if he's lost his humanist compass and he's auctioning off, women's rights so he can get some extra members. This throws away the fact that he, I think, originally started out as somebody who was an activist working on women's rights, and most of what he does is to expand human rights for everybody. But so, how do you feel about his decision to go to CPAC? Is that a good or a bad idea?
I think it's a great idea. I think it's important, and I think that from some of the evidence that we've seen from his engaging with conservatives, and even our engagement with conservatives, there's a lot more out there that we can do with the Republican Party, and they, quite frankly, the Democratic Party has a way to go also, but the Republican Party certainly has a way to go. I think if you also look at the evidence in terms of the studies that are out there, the Pew research shows that 14% of Republicans identify with no religion. 12% of the Public Religion Research Institute, their data shows that 12% of Republicans identify with no religion. So there's an absolute compelling reason for him to go. And I think it really kind of gets into the larger question of how Puritan are we as a movement that we say we have to only identify with progressive or liberal causes, that we can't reach out. We work with religious institutions, but we work with them specifically on the issues where we agree, because it's better to find the ways that we actually can work together to solve some of our problems than to just say, you know what, we disagree on too much, we're not going to have a conversation with you. And it just goes to also the diversity of our movement. We are an extremely diverse movement. The secular community is not just made up of liberal Democrats. There are a lot of libertarians in our movement who actually go to CPAC. And there's a great opportunity there for David and for me and for others when we're reaching out to conservatives to reach libertarians. So I think that we have to move off from this belief that we all have to identify specifically on every single issue that we have to agree on, and instead say there are fundamental values that we as a community, we as the secular community, hold dear. Sarah's done a great deal of work on the secular values voter this year, and we talk greatly about freedom, inclusion, equality, and knowledge as being the 4 values that secular Americans can all get behind. And when you take that, and I'm not going to throw all Republicans or conservatives into one hat, but the Christian right of the Republican Party and of the political parties in this country, they do not believe in freedom. They do not believe in inclusion. They do not believe in knowledge, and they certainly don't believe in equality. So if you look at the vast comparison between our movement and that small slice that has a great deal of political power still, but if you look at the differences there, the Republican Party, CPAC, the RNC, Republican state parties, this is all right for us to reach out and to identify. And Sarah's done some great work on that in helping to start to look at who our Republican activists are out there, and I think it's important.
Piggybacking on that, I do want to say that the Secular Coalition for America is a nonpartisan organization, and we are starting to actively engage and try to identify secular voters within every party, Democratic Party, Republican, Libertarian, and Greens. And I think this is actually the perfect time to start working with secular voters who really don't have a place in the Republican Party right now. I mean, you can be fiscally conservative or conservative in a number of ways and still believe in the separation of church and state and believe in evidence and science-based policy. And now is really a great time to start creating that space for secular voters within the party by working with secular people who are active within the party.
Yeah, I think that's very, David's point is this serves all of us. If we can divide religion from Republican, Libertarian, we can now have candidates that we can all evaluate carefully.
Sure.
So yeah, I mean, I'm glad you guys sort of just addressed that, because I think it's easy for us to stay quiet sometimes when somebody is being vilified. But one of the things I read years ago on Sam Harris's blog is that it's sort of important that if you're in a local setting, or if you're at the top of an institution and misinformation is being circulated or people are being slammed when they shouldn't be, we all step forward. This shouldn't be Dave Silverman's problem that he has to defend himself. It's great when multiple people come in and say, actually, this is how he's serving all of us. So I think we need to champion these people that sort of go out front and do important work like that.
If you don't mind me just saying really quickly, because we've been talking about the parties, but I think it's important to remember that Public Religion Research Institute showed us that 48% of non-religious voters are independents. And so it's really incumbent on us to demonstrate that secular voters are a constituency that needs to be paid attention to, because there's a lot of undecided voters out there. And if the parties want, the fastest growing and now largest religious demographic to vote for them, they have to know that about half of them are independent.
Yeah, and maybe we can jump to, I was sort of disappointed with two things that the Democrats did. One is when there was this active campaign from the top to smear Bernie Sanders as an atheist, and then sort of the whole reaction to that and how they didn't necessarily come out with as forceful a message as they might. And then the other is that they had more religiosity than I expected in the DNC convention, although you gave me a much more historical perspective and said how far they've come. So maybe you guys can address those and sort of point out where they were 20 years ago and how they're now representing atheist voters a little better.
Right. Well, we were certainly very disappointed with what happened with the DNC vilifying Bernie Sanders, and we were very outspoken. And I think it shows that there's a long way to go with the Democratic Party being more inclusive of secular Americans and being inclusive of non-religious people. But I'll point to three specific instances that I think show that we're moving in a positive direction at the National Convention. One was that Senator Cory Booker in his speech mentioned people of no religious faith. Reverend Barber mentioned people of no religious faith in his speech. And then Secretary Hillary Clinton, during her speech, referred to our national motto as the original one, E Pluribus Unum, not In God We Trust, the one that became the new motto in the height of the hysteria in the 50s. And I think that's pretty significant. She also said, I believe in science. It was kind of sad that had to be said, but she said it.
Yeah. To pick up on that, though, just for a second, I think that we also, we have to look at the two parties in terms of where they are currently now. Sarah's right. Sarah and I were both up in Philadelphia when the news was breaking over the weekend, and then on that Monday we held a first ever secular reception for delegates and for attendees of the Democratic National Convention, and that was tremendous. I was there throughout the whole convention, and the Bernie supporters were extremely disappointed, and I actually went on a couple of radio shows and I said that any Democrat in the country should feel disappointed over the email leak. It was unfortunate, and I think that but a number of top people in the DNC, of course, lost their jobs, and Debbie Wasserman Schultz stepped down, but if we look at it in comparison, and I think all we have to do is go back to last Tuesday night and watch the final question that was asked to the vice presidential candidates. And here you see Senator Tim Kaine, who is a Jesuit, who was Jesuit educated, who worked in Jesuit missionaries, and who served in any number of levels of government, from being the mayor of Richmond to now being a vice presidential nominee. The way that he characterized how religion plays a role in his personal life, but he distinguished how it plays a role in his politics and in the decisions that he makes from a public policy standpoint, and we compare that to Governor Pence. It's night and day. It really is night and day. Now, the one final thing I would say about the DNC is that at the convention, a lot of delegates and certainly a lot of politicians and pundits all boasted about how it was the most comprehensive platform that the Democratic Party's ever put forth, and yet, we pointed out the fact that we are grateful that it was comprehensive in its diversity, which I'm sorry, it wasn't the most comprehensive. It was the most diverse platform that had ever been put forward. And while we compliment them for that, we also have to point out that they did not talk about the non-religious in this country. And we've been having conversations with any number of officials from a lot of the campaign offices that to really hit home this point that 25% of Americans do not identify with religion. And this is a constituency that they have to start looking at, and they have to be more careful as they go forward when they are looking at demographic information to make sure that that demographic is in fact included.
Right. I think you've pointed out that now it's the single largest. There's more non-believers than, or non-affiliated than Catholics or Protestants, or however you break it up.
Evangelicals, right?
Right. So we really are huge.
That's
numbers.
correct. We're the largest religious demographic now in the country.
Okay. Do you want to just briefly go into your own religious background and your own personal journey and where you are now?
I'm happy to. I don't want to spend too much time on it, but I grew up in a religious family. I grew up in an independent Baptist church, the youngest of 7 kids on a dairy farm in upstate New York, and it was interesting. I don't know that I ever fully grasped or accepted a lot of the stuff that was being thrown against me, and I remember a lot of politics in church growing up, and they were things that I didn't believe in, be it what they call euthanasia, what we call death with dignity, be it LGBTQ equality, be it a woman's right to choose, be it our views on capital punishment. And so, in my early teen years, I stopped going, and when I went to college, I started going again. I became I had a great Jesuit priest on campus, and became a Catholic, and spent a number of years in the church. But I fell away from it. It was kind of one of those up and down, up and down, up and down things. When I like to joke, because the first 2 weeks before that I started this job, before we came out with a press announcement that I had been appointed to it, one of the things that we kept joking about in the office, how do we define who you are? Like, how do we go to the secular community and say, Larry is this or Larry is that? And we finally came down to Larry is an unaffiliated Christian. And if I explained it more in the day, I would have probably said it's because of my cultural identity to being raised Christian, to the traditions that my family still upholds, like Christmas and Easter and that sort of stuff, where we gather and we get together. But it certainly wasn't from a religious perspective. And being on the job now for 9 or 10 months, I've had an opportunity to read a number of books, because there are no shortage of books out there. I feel like I have to start writing a book. But it's been incredibly illuminating, and it's really forced me to start to ask some of the questions that perhaps I should have been asking all along. But it goes to your point that we were making earlier about reaching out to other individuals. Because I think that, I'm part of the 20% of Americans today that were raised with religion but have left. If it weren't for my deeper engagement in this community, I don't know where I'd fall, but it really helped to further my journey and kind of get me to a conclusion a lot sooner than perhaps I would. Today, I would say that I am an atheist.
Yeah, and I think in terms of getting a political voice, Dave Silverman again would really point out the importance of disambiguating. I still have some of these cultural feelings that I grew up with and have fondness to them. And half of Jews, there's so many Reformed Jews that are atheist or agnostic, but still identify as Jews because they do the holidays, they do observances,
sure.
they have their ties to their grandmas. But in terms of a political entity where critical thinking is important, it's important that we self-identify, we stop atheism from being a dirty word, and we do go through that intellectual process of figuring out where we really are.
Right.
So.
I would add to that, though, that I think it is very important. It's a very important part of our mission to make sure that we eliminate the stigma of being an atheist. But that 25%, only 1/3 of them say they do not believe in God. There are a number of people who still believe in a higher power that are considered religiously unaffiliated, according to that data. They're just not affiliated with any particular denomination. And I think it's important to point out that while American Atheists is one of our member organizations, we also have the Unitarian Universalist Humanists, and we have the American Ethical Union. And Ethical Union members may identify as humanists first or ethical culture first. UUs may as well identify as UU humanists. We have a wealth of diversity within our own movement, and I think it's important to open this space for people to identify as whatever seems to best fit them. So I do think it's incredibly important to eliminate the stigma against atheism, but I think it's also important to keep in mind the diversity of belief and identity within our own movement.
Yeah, so I run the Humanist group in Richmond, and we work out of a Unitarian church, and they support our group. Mm-hmm. They allow me to have programs where I come out and talk about atheism and critical thinking, and generally critical of religion. And I think you're right that we do need that open tent that you're talking about, that we have a lot of allies that share a lot of social values, that understand the importance of critical thinking to approach climate change and vaccination and all those sort of things. And it's a difficult thing to navigate, to figure out. Like, we don't want to shut off allies. We don't want to be dishonest about our own beliefs. But we do need to build this big coalition so we can help with governance. And so, so I'm very excited to work with you guys.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can you talk about? So you've almost completed a year now at Secular Coalition.
Yes.
What were your main objectives for this first year? How has that gone? And where do you see things going over the next 5 or 10 years? What are your goals?
So it was an interesting year to start because we went into an election year. We went into a year that a lot of it was already predetermined because we had the Reason Rally. And one of the things I really wanted to focus on this year when I came in was really helping to get some of the internal structure back to the way it should be, perhaps. Focus on financial stability, focus on getting the organization in a good place to move forward internally. Externally, work with our partners, certainly our member organizations, start to develop some more continuity in terms of our conversations with them and making sure that they were engaged with the organization. With our constituents, making sure that we are timely on the information that we're giving them through our action alerts, through our state chapters, through the federal legislation process, and then certainly the 2016 election, because it's a critical time for us to make sure that we're getting information out to secular Americans about this is where candidates stand. You should know that. We have our congressional report cards that we also have on secular values voter. Those cards give certainly a grade to members of Congress based on a number of criteria that we had selected. A lot of work that goes into all of that in terms of gathering that information, being able to synthesize it, being able to award it a grade, and it's also very instructive for people out there who might not know how their member of Congress voted on a particular issue that they care about. This year also, and I'm really pleased that we did this back in July, we spent some time with Todd Stiefel at his home in North Carolina, and Todd facilitated a strategic planning retreat for us, which I think is absolutely critical and fundamental, that really helps to forecast our next 5 years. And a lot of it's refocusing our mission so that it's more tight, it's more concentrated. The objectives of the organization, the strategic emphasis that we're going to put forward to meet those goals, and then of course all the tactics underneath it. So we're going through a process right now where we're continuing. We developed a strategic planning committee of the board. We're having conversations with our member organizations and our other constituents to get their input. And by 2017, we'll be in a very good place to move forward for several years to come. I'm really delighted about this process. I think that for a new executive director coming into any organization, you have to take the first 6 or 7 months and really kind of step back. You don't want to put changes in place immediately, but you want to learn from the people who have been doing the work. Our staff has been tremendous to work with, and to really get a sense of the organization and where you can see strengths and where you can see deficiencies, and then start to communicate collectively about how to fill some of the voids and make us stronger going forward. So I think that this has been a year of transition for us, but we're going to be looking for any number of years of growth going forward.
Yeah, I think just your background with lobbying and business and taking this whole approach of professionalizing the organization, and it's something that we're trying to do and to figure out how to do. And you've been wonderful. I'm very excited about how open you are to this idea of sharing resources and know-how and figuring out how to do stuff, because all of us have different strengths. And there's only so much you can sustain on pure volunteerism. Mm-hmm. And so, pulling this all together, figuring out how we work, maybe you can both speak about this. How do you see us moving forward in the next 5 or 10 years and starting to work as a community where we really do share resources and know-how and sort of work together instead of as divided groups?
Well, I mean, I think that, from a resource standpoint, just purely resource, there are a lot of different organizations that have the same subscriptions, and where we could cut costs collectively if we're working together on, a single platform, which I think is important, because right now, even though I think all of us in the secular movement have huge opportunities for growth. Right now, we're looking at a limited pool of resources, of financial contributions, and I mean, it's incumbent upon all of us to, as secular leaders, to grow that pool of resources and to make sure we're out there doing that work every day and reaching out to new donors and explaining to people why it's important to contribute to secular organizations. But I think that there are other ways that we can grow, and I think that part of it is our strategic plan and resources that we can provide. Really helping to professionalize and get the engagement of, and this is something that I think will help the entire movement, not just the Secular Coalition for America. If I can back up for a second, when I took this job, I took it under the notion that we are a coalition. We represent not just who we are as the Secular Coalition for America, we also represent 19 other groups. So we try to publicize and we try to advertise as much as we can for our member organizations so that the people who may be focused specifically on SCA also know what other organizations are doing and how they can support other organizations. From that perspective, the old adage, and it's usually meant for fundraising, but I think it's meant for political work as well, that at high tide all ships rise, and I think it's really important for us to think that way. I think it's important for donors. I think it's important for our competitors, people who are our detractors, to see that we are a unified movement. And that we are strong and we have power in numbers, and instead of having them always be on the offensive, let's start putting them on the defensive. Let's start taking the lead, and we can do that by coming together around a shared set of values. We've already talked about freedom, inclusion, equality, and knowledge. But from a purely policy standpoint, if we start to create strong agendas that we all can agree on, and pursue every year. It doesn't mean the Secular Coalition is going to take the lead on all of them. I look at some of the international stuff. CFI, Michael Dodora, a lobbyist for them, he is the international person, and I turn to him as a subject matter expert. There are any number of different things that we can do that I'm looking forward to doing once we get this election behind us. And I think the good test case for this is going to be the 2018 midterm elections. That's going to be a good test case. When we first launched Secular Values Voter, we thought it was going to go through November 8th, and then it was kind of going to go away. No, this is going to be something that we're going to continue to push and push and push and continue to educate as we can get more granular going into the midterm 2018 election.
And can you say a word or two about the atheist voter program that's also going on with American atheists?
What I can say is that before we launched Secular Values Voter, I did have a conversation with Dave Silverman, because I think it's important, especially for me, leading the Secular Coalition for America, that our member organizations don't think we're trying to compete with them. I think that there are Americans who identify as secular. I think that there are Americans who identify as humanist, as agnostic, as whatever definition they want to put behind them. And that identity is incredibly important. So we retweet, we re-Facebook things from Atheist Voter, from I'm a Secular Voter, is that what it is, FFRF's campaign, with the intent that we're not competing with them. And I think it's incredibly important that people can align with where they feel most closely identifies them. Our movement, what we're trying to do at Secular Values Voter is to educate secular Americans, however they define themselves, as best as we possibly can, with real-time information on candidates going into the 2016 election, as well as on public policy issues, and certainly, as I said before, going into the 2018 midterms. And I don't know, do you want to say another word or two about Secular Values Voter?
Right, yeah, and I would add to your question of Atheist Voter. American Atheist clearly has a mission that is driven by serving atheists. And that's an important constituency to serve. We serve our 19 member organizations representing the full diversity of identity within the religiously unaffiliated demographic. And so we have to have kind of a broader tent. And Secular Values Voter is actually moving away from the identity piece and moving toward values. What are the values that we have in common? And people of faith, they actually identify as a Secular Values Voter if they understand the separation of church and state and why it benefits people of all faiths and no faith. And a little bit more on the 4 values. I mean, the 4 values are not arbitrary at all. Any single issue, you could point to any issue that the Secular Coalition takes a position on, and I can talk to you about it in terms of one of those 4 values. You know, climate change is an issue of knowledge because our policy should be evidence-based, and we believe that information empowers people. The government has a role in providing the best possible and accurate information and basing policy decisions solely on reason, evidence, and science. Freedom, for us, you know, our definition of freedom is protecting beliefs but never allowing them to be imposed. You know, equality means that people of all faiths and none are protected, and it means equal rights and it means equal responsibilities. Right. So it's not just equal rights, you know, when it comes to non-discrimination laws, it's equal responsibilities when it comes to tax policy. So if you're getting tax benefits, you're getting funds from the government, you shouldn't be allowed to discriminate while using those funds, for example. And then finally, inclusion. It's about all faiths and none. It means everything from making sure that non-religious people in the military have equal access to the same resources as people of faith. It means no religious displays on government property, because unless it's all or none, right? It's you represent everybody or you're completely religiously neutral. So it's really a move in the direction of talking about our issues in a way that's going to appeal to the full 25% of religiously unaffiliated, regardless of where they stand in terms of how they choose to identify, and beyond that 25%.
Yeah, I remember I interviewed Jason Torpey, who's the head of Military Atheist and Free Thinkers, a year or two ago, and he really talked about the predatory nature when you don't have a humanist chaplain, how you have these young people at the most vulnerable point in their lives that are facing death, they're away from their families, and there's these religious apologetic sites that say, this is the guys we got to target, this is how we do it. So you know, we really do need people to sort of stand up for those people that are risking their lives for us to make sure that they're protected. The other thing I want to turn to is that I can see a lot of things that you do for the secular community and for just the regular community at large. You're really serving their interests. How can secular individuals or secular organizations help make your job easier at improving our society?
I think the number one thing, based on the data that we're looking at, is voter registration of the secular community. So we're now the largest religious demographic. So there's 2 organizations we get our data from. One is Pew, the other is Public Religion Research Institute. Depending on which data you look at, we're either the largest or we're at least the same size as evangelicals, depending on how you define evangelicals. But they're beating us 2-to-1 in voter turnout. In the last 4 presidential elections, the religiously unaffiliated, only 12% have been voting. And so we have the numbers. The numbers are growing rapidly. I'm confident we are going to outnumber the evangelical voting bloc in just a number of years, if not next year, because we went from nearly, 23% last year, and now we're at 25%, a full quarter of the American public. But if our member organizations, if we don't do our part in getting our community to vote, and to be recognized as a political constituency, then having the numbers doesn't mean anything. So I think a big part of what we need to do, what our member organizations need to do, is support us in getting the vote out.
I think that there's that. The other thing I would say, and this goes to both individuals and to our member organizations, and it really does piggyback on what Sarah's saying. While it's important to vote, it's also important to become a citizen activist, a citizen lobbyist. A lot of our member organizations, of the 19, they have their own constituents that they reach out. They have their own members, and for them to be able to convey to their members, to go above the group interactions that we have and all of this other sort of stuff as a community, but to actually get engaged with the secular coalition, make sure you're receiving action alerts, call your members of Congress, call your local officials. Again, of course, get out and vote, but it's imperative that we actually have that kind of cohesion and that we increase the number of people that we can call on, so that if there's a bill at the federal level and Sarah and I as lobbyists go up and talk to a member of Congress and give them why we think it's important they support the bill or why they don't, why they shouldn't, that once that member goes home for a constituent work period, the local constituent, which is so much more important than Sarah and me, is able to go to their district office and sit down with them and say, I know that the Secular Coalition folks were in to see you in Washington, but I want you to know you have constituents here who care about this bill. It makes so much more sense, and it's actually so much more effective for when elected officials can see that I have someone, I'm not going to vote for them because I don't live in their district, but they have someone in their district who does. That makes a difference.
Right. So one of the recurrent themes in the humanist group that I work with has been a lot of people feel we get together, we have these intellectual discussions on how we can improve society, but how do you affect change? And so this is part of how you do it. And maybe you can talk about Lobby Day a little bit, because I think you do empower people. Even in our conversations before, I've always been skeptical if I go and talk to, I make a point, I have Eric Cantor before he gets replaced by Bratt. It's unclear to me, are they really going to care? I'm going to walk out the door and they're going to be, please. But you say it really does make a difference when people show up.
It does make a difference.
And have these faces. So again, can you tell us about how Lobby Day works and just like your experience on why it really matters to be engaged as a citizen?
Yeah, I'm happy to. Lobby Day happens annually. This year we did it in conjunction with a Reason Rally. I've done a number of Lobby Days in my past with various organizations that I've worked for, volunteered with. And I have to say that the Secular Coalition for America this year put on one of the best Lobby Days I'd ever seen. We had over 300 people attend on a Thursday and a Friday. The Thursday we did the U.S. Senate. On Friday we did the House of Representatives. We ultimately ended up reaching out to all, if not most, of legislative offices. Even if we didn't have meetings scheduled, we made sure that they got the information that we had. The idea of a Lobby Day essentially is to, because members love it when you come to their office in Washington and you meet with them, and even if you're here on a vacation, if you come to Washington for vacation, it means a lot to them that you care enough about government and you care enough about your hometown that you would take an hour out of your vacation to go to the Hill and sit down with your member of Congress and have a 15 or 20-minute conversation about issues that are important to you. And to listen to them as well. And it's the way you develop a relationship. When you go home and you're able to reconnect with them at home, and you're able to say, yeah, I've talked to 15 of my friends who knew I was going to Washington and how I met with you, and everyone was all excited about that. That makes them realize you're engaged in the community as well. So it's incredibly important. I think that we're looking at dates right now for our 2017 Lobby Day. We're certainly going to try to get it out there as quickly as possible, so we can start to get people registered to come to Washington and meet with their elected officials, and then hopefully continue building on Lobby Day. And getting people to start having real strong relationships with their elected officials. Now, Sarah does a lot of work at the state level also in helping states put together Lobby Days. And I'll just be quiet and let you talk for a few minutes.
Right, sure. So it's great when people are able to come to DC. Not everybody is. It is during the work week because that's when members are in their offices. And so we have had Lobby Days in California. We've had Lobby Days in North Carolina, and I'd love to expand that. My answer when people ask me the question, what can we do in our state, is always dependent on how many people I can count on who are on the ground, because I can't be everywhere. I can't be, we're tracking legislation in all of the states, but until you have that ground support, the boots on the ground, the people who are the eyes and ears, who are doing the organizing, who know the local communities, who can, call organizers on the phone and say, hey, I need you to make a phone call, I need you to write letters. That's what we really need. So as far as what local groups can support, we have the resources, but we need the people power who will actually stand up and do these things. And we offer trainings for people to do it on the state level. You don't have to wait to go to your state capital. You don't have to go to Washington, D.C. You can meet with your legislators in your home districts.
So if people watching, or people that see this eventually, want to get involved, how do they physically contact you? Say, I live in this city, I'm in this group, I'd love to help. What should they do to?
That's a great question. You go to states.secular.org and you'll see a button that says Apply to Volunteer. We have a volunteer application system, and then you'll be followed up with by us, and we'll get you all set up.
Excellent.
And did ask something earlier about seeing your representative, right? And do they really care if they're so bad on my issues? And I think it's really important to say yes, because lobbying is a long game, right? And we don't expect to have immediate successes, and especially in really red states. But you're never going to get anywhere if your representatives don't even know that you exist as a constituency. The very first step is visibility. So yes, you might knock on those doors and they meet with you and they're not going to budge at all. But now that they know you are a constituency, they're going to pay more attention. And there's a lot of things that happen behind closed doors that you don't know about. You might be able to soften a position. You know, if you can be enough of a pain in their butt that they know if they're going to sponsor the next thing Family Research Council comes and they're like, you know what, I know I'm going to get so many phone calls from this local humanist group, I don't want to deal with it. I already did you a favor with that other bill and I'm not taking this one up. You're never going to know. But until you have that visibility, you're never going to get anywhere.
Yeah, I think that's a great point about keeping the long game in mind. And so if I do something, it may not have an effect, but by the third or fourth person that comes in and does something, it might start to resonate. So that's a great point.
I think if we look at every movement in the country, that's been the case. You know, it really has been. And I think that that's why a lot of people tire of it so quickly, because they don't have the immediate gratification. You know, there's not that immediate satisfaction. It's one of the reasons I did a lot of the work I did before I came to do this work. Because, you know, I'm openly gay. I could have worked in the LGBTQ movement if I wanted to dedicate my life to that. But you face so many disappointments before you face, you know, that step forward. And Sarah's absolutely right about the long game. I'm glad you said that.
Yeah. So you brought up in previous conversation, I think you're the only openly gay leader of a major secular organization. What do you think we should be taking from the success of that movement and applying to our own to get, you know, less distaste for atheists and more political clout?
I think that there are any number of things. I mean, we can go back to, you know, back to the 60s and 70s, the beginning of the LGBT movement with Stonewall. We can go back to, and just looking at you know, the struggles that the LGBT movement has gone through. I will point out something about the diversity of the movement, though. Not just the LGBTQ movement, but also our movement, and where they do actually play hand in hand. If it weren't for ACT UP, HIV/AIDS progress probably would not have been made as quickly in the years of the Republicans in the 80s and into the early 90s. And I think that that the LGBTQ community owes a lot of credit to the hard work of ACT UP. There are people who get frustrated in our movement and they feel the need to act up and speak out more vocally, and I think that we have to recognize the importance for them as much as the importance for those of us who are trying to do work in perhaps different ways. But from a political standpoint, you know, you look at what the LGBTQ movement did, you know, with the Gay and Lesbian Victory Fund, and I'll point to two quick things here. One, they were able to allow LGBTQ people in this country realize it's okay for you to run for office, just like it's okay for atheists to run for office, and humanists and other non-theists in this country to run for office. And two, it's a way to concentrate your political power and to work within the political parties to say that we're going to cultivate these relationships so that you hear us and you know that we're here, and this is a constituency you cannot ignore. I think that's something huge we can play from. And then, you know,
and let me jump in. We've got about 1 minute left, so yeah, if you can encapsulate this in about 45 seconds.
Yeah, you know, essentially, there are a lot of areas that we can really pull some pages from the LGBTQ political playbook over the last couple of decades, recognizing that that they have been a good friend of ours. We have been one of their strongest supporters, and so as we've gotten a lot of progress made in the LGBT community, we have a lot of political favor that we've also curried over the past 2 decades in terms of working and supporting their efforts.
Well, we just have a few seconds left. Thank you so much for both of you. Are there any people can check you out where if they want to learn more about Secular Coalition? Where do they?
Secular.org, as well as secularvaluesvoter.org for the Secular Values Voter campaign. And I just want to close by encouraging all the secular voters out there to vote and get involved.
All right. Thank you guys so much for being with us today.
Thanks for having us, and thanks to Brian and Paul in the control room.